Thank you. Thank you. So this is a very vast topic, and I think I was a bit too ambitious by picking, this topic, especially with 6 commentaries and 3 sub-commentaries. I don't know how much time we will have. So roughly 1 hour, an hour and 15 minutes. We'll go as far as we can get. Otherwise, I encourage you to explore this wonderful literature on your own. So let's begin. Here's how I plan to proceed. I'll first introduce briefly the Sri Vaishnava commentaries, especially the ones, not especially, but actually only the ones on the Nalayara Divya Prabandham. And then I'll introduce the commentaries on the Tiruvāymoḻi and their sub-commentaries as well. Not all of them, a couple of them. I think these 2 parts should take hopefully not more than half an hour, so that it gives us some time to read and explore the Tiruvāymoḻi 241 along with either whole commentaries when the commentaries are short, or at least portions of them. So here we go. So the very first work in Sri Vaishnava Manipravalam is a commentary. It's a Vyakhyana by Pillan, Thirukuruhai Piran Pillan. I will speak more about him in a minute. And on the whole, there are about 40 commentaries on the Nalayara Divya Prabandham in Manipravalam. And as you probably all of you know, Periyavachan Pillai, who's a Vyakhyana Chakravarti, has commented on all the works by all the Arvas. So that's roughly 24 works. And some works, like the Tirupavai and the Tiruvāymoļi, have been commented upon more than once. Like the Tiruvāymoļi. Why? Well, I think it's very obvious sometimes, the answer for this. For example, it's known as the Dravida Veda, as you know, the Tamil Veda, which really suggests its great importance. The acharyas believed that it has layers and layers of meanings, very deep meanings that needed to be elucidated. And that can be only done by commenting upon them. So there are 5 complete commentaries composed between the 12th and the 14th centuries, plus another one that is less known. We'll speak about this. And I'm not even counting here the modern commentaries, the modern explanations and glosses. There are so many of them. So before we go and see in detail these commentaries, which we shall see in a minute, let me explain a few things about the commentaries in general. So you may have noticed that many of these commentaries are called Araira Padi, Unbadinaira Padi. So what is a Padi? A Padi is a Grantham, and a Grantham is actually 32 syllables. So it's roughly the size of a shloka in the Anushtup meter. We all know, for example, Sri Rama Rama Rameti Rame Rame Manorame Sahasranama Tatulyam Rama Nama Varanane. So those 2 lines together make up 32 syllables. So one padi is roughly that size. I don't know the details about how they count, but this is the rough estimate. So when you see Araira Padi, it's 6,000 times 32 syllables. So that is 1,92,000 syllables. But if you speak of the Ida Bhagavad Vishayam, the Muppataraira Padi, 36,000 into 32, which is 11,52,000 syllables. Oh my God. Okay. Now, a few words now that I've explained more or less, and of course, Araira Padi, Unbadinaira Padi, it's simply, it tells you about the size of the work. Manipravalam, a few words on Manipravalam before I proceed. Manipravalam, especially the Sri Vaishnava Manipravalam, basically has sentences with Tamil structure. So the sentence structure is in Tamil, and it is interspersed with Sanskrit vocabulary. Now, how much Sanskrit depends on the Vyakhyata, on the commentator sometimes. For example, Pillan tends to have more Sanskrit than Nampillai, for example. But sometimes it also depends on what they are commenting upon. For example, if they are writing on a text that is very theologically charged, like Tiruvāymoļi 111, there are so many layers of deep meanings that they have to use the technical vocabulary in Sanskrit. So they maintain those words in Sanskrit, like dharmi, bhuta, jnanam, etc. They don't try to translate them into Tamil. But some pasurams do not require a heavy presence of Sanskrit. For example, while commenting on the Varanamayiram, which we all know by Antar, Periyavachan Pillai uses very simple Tamil, very little Sanskrit in this. He just sits back and enjoys describing Andar's marriage with Krishna, comparing it with Sita's marriage with Rama. But somewhere else in the Nachiyar Tirumuri, maybe it gets a bit more Sanskritic because the subject matter requires more Sanskrit. Okay, in what form does Sanskrit occur here? So sometimes you have Sanskrit words, of course. Sometimes you have more or less long samasas, meaning compound words. Sometimes these are directly borrowed from important Purvacharya literature. For example, Pillan quotes from Swami Ramanuja's Sri Bhashyam. He literally embeds expressions from him. And also, very importantly, Sanskrit's presence is felt with quotations in Sanskrit, because as you know, the acharyas quote many pramanas, authoritative evidence. For whatever point they make, they say, look, I'm not saying this. Even the Purvacharyas said this, even the Vedas say this, the Upanishads say this, the Puranas. So all these works are quoted, and especially the Ramayana. You will see they were really obsessed with the Ramayana, and that is lovely, I think. Now, usually the Vyakhyatas do not give the source. For example, they will say, Sada Pashyanti Surayaha Ennuma Pole Yeppurudum Periya Perumade Sevittu Kondirundar. Sada Pashyanti Surayaha. Where does that come from? If you don't know it yourself, they presume that you already know. Well, in this generation, I think in the 21st century, it's hard for some of us, at least. Some scholars obviously would know. But thankfully, we have later acharyas who are there to help. One way of helping is writing the Arumpada Vilakam. I will tell some more later on about them. I'll just mention here the Pramana Tirate. So Tirate is gathering together, and Pramanas are these authoritative evidence. So this is, they collect together. People like Swami Madavada Mamunigar, for example, wrote the Eatin Pramana Tirate. The Eid Bhagavisham quotes so many works. So he has written this Eatin Pramana Tirate where he gives the source of the quotation, but also gives a lot more, a bigger chunk of the quotation and explains them if needs be. So this is a very important contribution to scholarship and to our understanding of these texts. But usually these works only focus on Sanskrit pramanams, although there are many, many Tamil pramanams as well, especially from the Divya Prabandham and most especially from the Tiruvāymoḻi. Even verses from the Tiruvāymoļis are explained, different parts of the verses are explained using other Tiruvāymoļi verses. And sometimes the acharyas quote even Sangam works. I have seen quotations from the Kurundohai, for example, but also from the Nigantus, etc. Well, also the sentences. If we move on to the sentences, sometimes the sentences can be a bit long, so finding your way can be a bit of a challenge. But remember, the sentences are never as complex as in the Guru Parampara literature, where you have pages and pages and just one sentence that goes on for many pages. You don't usually have that in the commentaries. Because many of the commentaries like the Ida are actually discourses, it has a very oral character. So sometimes some important words are left out. You know, that's also a challenge, and that's also where the Arumpada Vilakams help. I'll mention that later on. And these are a delight to read. The Ida, for example, is delightful to read because although it can have very technical vocabulary in Sanskrit, it also has a very rich Tamil vocabulary, can be very down to earth, colorful, with proverbs and expressions we have never heard about. And it also contains anecdotes about the lives of the Purvacharyas, and also it gives the different interpretations by the Acharyas, concerning a certain passage. And so it tells us a lot about the life and the people around them, about the social, cultural, maybe even political life, at least for a certain set of people. Now, finally, before we move on and see who these Vyakhyatas and their works were, why Manipravalam? Why did they not, write the commentaries in Sanskrit? Because everyone before Pillan wrote the commentaries in Sanskrit. Swami Ramanuja himself wrote in Sanskrit. Now, there are many suggestions as to why this is the case. Traditional scholars have ideas, academics have ideas. If we just focus on the traditional idea, it is that the Purvacharyas thought that if the meanings of the Tiruvāymoļi and the other Prabandhams need to be understood for the following generations, he was probably thinking of us, our generation, it needs to be in Tamil. If it's solely in Sanskrit, oh my God, just imagine us discussing this if it were a Sanskrit, uh, especially a commentary the size of the Ida in Sanskrit, unthinkable. And also, the Arva poems were written in sweet Tamil. And writing in Sanskrit will mean that people won't know the sweetness of those words. So these are a few reasons why they opted to write in Sanskrit, but for whatever reason, they had to mix Sanskrit as well. Now, the commentators. So as you can see here, I have a list of 5 in blue. Those are the standard most important commentaries, at least most important by some standards, but not all standards. One of them in pink, it's by a lady, as Parthasarathi sir said while in his introduction. And then 2 in gray, which are supposed to have existed, 2 commentaries which are supposed to have existed, but don't anymore. So if we begin with Pillan, so Tirukkurai Piran Pillan, I will introduce them individually also, so no worries. So he wrote the Arayara Padi, this is 6,000 padis. And it's said that he wrote this in the same prakriyai as the Vishnu Purana, because counting it in a certain way, the Vishnu Purana has 6,000 verses. Nanjiyar was a Vedantin, so he wrote 9,000 padis in the same prakriyai as the Sri Bhashyam, because he was a Vedantin, you see. Sri Bhashyam has 9,000 granthams. And then Nampillai, who was his disciple and who was capable of elaborating everything, wrote in the same prakriyai as the Shruta Prakashika, which is a commentary on the Sri Bhashyam. So that is written in, that has 36,000 granthams. And then you have Periyavachan Pillai, who was a Rama lover, a lover of the Ramayana. So obviously he wrote 24,000 padis corresponding to the number of shlokas in the Ramayana. And then Vadi Kesari Arige Manavala Chiyar, who wrote 12,000 granthams in 12,000 padi, which corresponds to the Bhagavata Purana. Of course, you might say Bhagavata is not that much, but there's a certain way of counting it and certain belief that there are 12 skandhas in the Bhagavata Purana with 12,000 verses. And then finally, there is the lady, Tirukoneri Dasye. Well, her work is not called Padi. It's known as the Tiruvāymoḻi Vasaka Malai or Vivarana Shatakam, as you will see later on. And then there are these 2 commentaries, which you may have heard about. So there is this one here, which is said to have been composed by Naduvil Tiruvidi Pillai. It was composed in the same prakriya as the Mahabharata, they say. So it's 1,25,000 padi. Now, why is it not extant anymore? I think most of you would know the story. It's that Nampillai asked Periyavachan Pillai, or at least gave him the permission to compose a commentary on the Tiruvāymoļi, but Naduvil Tiruvidi Pillai had written his own version. And when Nampillai discovered this, he was unhappy because his permission was not sought. But also, he thought it was too long and too elaborate, which means that it gave out too many details that were not meant for all the years. So what he did was he soaked the palm leaves in water and gave it to the termites that just ate up the whole work. So the work does not exist. And then there is Vedanta Deshika's Nigama Parimalam, which it is said to have been 74,000 padi. I don't know more about this. There are many different theories. I don't know what to say because we don't know. So these are the commentaries that either exist or do not exist anymore that are said to have existed. Now, if we go to the individual commentaries, let's begin with Pillan because he's the one who started writing commentaries. It's, as you know, Pillan was the disciple of Ramanuja, also his family, and he was considered as his Manasa Putran and one of the 74 Simhasanadhipatis, and I believe he was also part of the Shribhashyam Kalakshepa Simhasanam. And you probably also know the story that some of the disciples of Swami Ramanuja asked him to write a commentary the way he wrote commentaries on the Sanskrit works. But Ramanuja said, no, look, if I write a commentary, then people will think that this is the final take, this is the final interpretation on the Tiruvāymoļi, and that is not good. You know, he wanted to encourage more people to interpret the Tiruvāymoļi. So he asked Pillan to write a commentary, which he did. And it is a puripurai, actually, which means that it's a commentary which paraphrases the text or summarizes the substance of each verse. So it's a very short work, like the many early commentaries. Now, if you look Even at the very early commentaries on the Sangam works, Ahananuru, Purananuru, etc., the very early commentary is very, very short because the people just went straight to the point. Now, the later commentaries expand upon the first commentaries, and then, they are more elaborate. So in this commentary, Pillan tends to have more Sanskrit than Tamil, more or less. He has also very long Sanskrit samasas, sometimes directly taken from Ramanuja's works, as I mentioned earlier on. I hope I'm not going very fast. To my mind, I'm going at a normal speed, but it's quite possible that I'm actually going faster than I'm thinking I'm going. Anyway, just let me know if I should go slower. And then there are different reasons why he uses more Sanskrit than Tamil. We don't need to get into that now. One thing I need to mention, you will notice very soon, is that Pillan does not have pratikas. What is pratika? It's when a commentator cites the first word or words of a verse, like the Tiruvāymoḻi Pasuram, and then says how he interprets that or those words. Okay, Pillan doesn't have that. He just has a paragraph. We will see more when we read his commentary. The next one is by Nanjiyar. Nanjiyar is very famous for his passion for the Tiruvāymoļi. He is said to have explained, he is said to have done kalakshepams given kalakshepams of the Tiruvāymoļi over 100 times. And it is said that in the Guru Parampara literature that Parashara Bhattar, his acharya, asked him to write a commentary, which is why he did. Now, there's also a story linked to it. It seems that although the Unbadinayarapadi, which is made up of 9,000 verses, granthas, Nanjiyar is the author. It is said that the scribe is his disciple, Nampilla. You must know the story. Nanjiyar wrote the first copy of his work, but he usually, apparently in those days, they asked a student, a disciple who had a very good handwriting, to make a nice prati, a nice copy. So he asked Nampillai to make a nice copy of this original work. Nampillai said, fine, I'll do it, but I'll do it from my own village where I can focus on this. So he tried to cross the Kaveri, and unfortunately, or it's Bhagavat Sankalpam, the manuscripts got carried away by the Kaveri. And he was very upset, but the Guru Parampara literature says, thanks to Ranganatha and also his terrific memory, he sat down and then he remembered every single bit and wrote down. And then he offered it to Nanjiyar. Nanjiyar read it, he was like, look, this is very nice, but I know that it is not entirely my work because there are passages here which I wanted to write about, but I didn't. Now tell me the truth. So Nampillai confesses, and Nanjiyar was really, really happy about this. So this is that Vyakhyana. So what is special about this? Well, Nanjiyar, every time he comments upon a verse, he begins with a short introduction, an avatarike, which is followed by the later commentators. So in that way, he is a trendsetter. Sometimes he only has those introductory sentences. Sometimes the commentary section is very short and sometimes it's incomplete. It seems, if I understand correctly, that there have been some minor losses in the text. Some words, maybe paragraphs or expressions have been lost during the transmission process. Unfortunate, but there you go. The Unbadinayarapadi, for example, I think, according to some of the specialists, has roughly an equal amount of Sanskrit and Tamil. And Nanjiyar also gives the pratika. So he says Adi Adi, for example, he says Adi Adi, and then he gives his comment on Adi Adi. Aham Karenta, and then he gives his comment. So it's easier to follow. He was very influential because I think both Periyavachan Pillai and Nampillai in the Eid especially follow him, especially Periyavachan Pillai, who really closely followed this commentary. Of course, he elaborates upon them because it's a much bigger work. Now the Eid. So as all of you surely know, the Eid is attributed, of course, to Nampillai, but it was written down by Vadakku Tiruvedi Pillai. You must know the story that Nampillai once went to Vadakku Tiruvedi Pillai's place, and then he found all these manuscripts. And that's when he discovered that Vadakku Tiruvedi Pillai had been writing this. And he was a little upset because he didn't take his permission. And then Vadakku Tiruvedi Pillai says, no, sorry, but these are lecture notes. It's because I can't remember everything you say. So I've written them down so that I can revise all these at night. So Nampillai just takes this, and then much later on, he gives it to Iyunni Madhavacharya, and then to be transmitted in the Oranbari way, meaning only one person can teach it to another one person. And then it changes only with Swami Manavada Mamunigal. We won't get into that story. It's the Ida Parampara, transmission Parampara story. Now, the Ida is, I think, personally think, is one of the longest commentary ever written by humankind. And he manages to get into details about almost all the things. It's almost like a kind of encyclopedia. Nampillai is said to have listened to all 100 Kalakshepams by Nanjiyar. So he probably like put everything inside it. And it is basically his teachings, right? This is clearly lecture notes, what we would call lecture notes, because he was giving his discourse and his student was writing it down. So it's very, very oral. So when you read it, it feels as if, Nampillai is speaking to us. Now, some of you might have wondered why it's called the Ida. It's the Muppattarayirapadi, but why Ida? Well, there are at least 3 different interpretations. The first is that Ida inai kidayadu, adanal Ida. So it has no match. It's matchless. That's why it's called Ida. Or Tiruvāymoļi tammai ஈடுபடுத்துகிறது. Adanal Ida. So it gets us involved, focused on the Tiruvāymoļi, and that's why it's called Ida. Or else we can take that Ida is actually a vikara for grammatical reasons. Ida becomes Ida. The syllable becomes the vowel gets lengthened, it becomes Ida. And Ida, idudal, like the verb, has at least two different meanings. One is writing, like kayyuppam idudal, we say. And it is a reference to writing because Vadakku Tiruvidi Pillai wrote and then gave it to us. Or it could mean kavacham idudal. All this is given by Vedukudi Krishnan Swami in his Ida Kalakshepam CDs. You can really enjoy if you actually listen to that. So the second meaning is kavacham idudal, which means putting on an armor. So it's not an armor for the body, but the Ida puts on an armor for our soul so that it protects us from the samsara and help us leave it. So this is the reason why it's called an Ida. What else can I say? Well, I think it's really delightful to read the Ida, and I really encourage people to go and explore the Ida if ever you have the time. Even if you don't have the time, actually, just make time for this. Okay, and then comes Periyavachan Pillai's 24,000 Padi. It is based very much on Pillai's teachings and instructions. What Pillai does is, okay, I mean, I'm not saying more on him. I think all of us know Pillai. So he was referred to as Paramakarunikar because he gave so many commentaries out of compassion for the people, but he was also the emperor among commentators. Yeah, so he had the permission to write a commentary on the Tiruvāymoļi, which is what he did. What Pillai does is give meanings to groups of words in the order that the words occur in the verse, in the pasuram. And then later on, what he does is sometimes, if necessary, he shuffles the orders of the groups of words and then explains more in detail. And in some places, he also explains by giving different shastrarthams. And I think one of his specialities is explaining when the antadi style does not work. As you know, in the Tiruvāymoļi, when the word that ends a pasuram, the same word occurs in the following pasuram. That's why it's an antadi. And sometimes you don't have the same word. And I think there is, I can't remember which Tiruvāymoļi, but one of the verses end with the word pu, and the next verse begins with the word te namar or something like that. And then he explains why it does not matter, because the link between these two pasurams is the meaning. Pu and tenar, as you know, is honey. It says all flowers have honey. So the link between pu and ten is actually meaning-wise, not word-wise. So he does that sort of thing. And his commentary, just like all his other commentaries, have been written in a very systematic way. He was writing it. He doesn't get into unnecessary details. He really sticks to the point. So it is said, even by the scholars, that even if something is not very clear in the Ida, etc., all you need to do is look at what Piriyavachan Pillai says, and it really helps a lot in understanding. Okay, the next one then. This is by Vadi Kesari Arage Manavalaji's Panira Irapadi. So that's 12,000 padis. As you probably know, this J.S. Swami was Piriyavachan Pillai's disciple, but also Nayanar Achan Pillai's disciple. And the Guru Paramparas tell us that he worked in the kitchen and that the other students laughed at him because he was said to be not very bright. And one day they were discussing something, and he asked, "What are you discussing about?" And they said, as a joke, they said, "We're discussing about Musalaki Salayam." That means Ulakai Kurunda. It means sprouts from a wooden pestle. Of course, that's nonsense. And when Piriyavachan Pillai hears it, he decides to make him a scholar, and that's exactly what he does. And apparently starts teaching him, and he was already 32 years old by then. But he becomes a scholar thanks to his acharya's grace. And he became so good that he was given the title of Vadi Kesari because he was a lion among debaters. And he even wrote a word called Musalaki Salayam. And his Panira Irapadi is actually gives a word by word or groups of word by groups of word meanings to the Tiruvāymoḻi itself. It doesn't get into much detail. It doesn't get into very complicated theological interpretations. And acharyas think that there's a reason why. They think that people by the time of Vadikesari Jiyar, people were not so well educated anymore. They were not so much interested in learning anymore because the times they were living in were very difficult. There was some kind of social unrest, fear, political instability. Some of the acharyas say it's because, there were invasions from Muslim invasions from the Delhi Sultanate, etc. That's the reason that people were not even able to understand the Tiruvāymoḻi, because the previous acharyas, commentators presumed that everybody understood the Tiruvāymoļi, so they only focused on the meanings that were not visible immediately. But here he focuses almost already on the meanings of the words of the Tiruvāymoļi. I hope I make myself clear. So we will see, hopefully if we have the time, a few examples. Now we get to this lady, Tirukoneri Dasi, who wrote this work. Only one manuscript of this work can be found, and I think it's kept at the Saraswati Mahal Library in Tanjavur. It was only discovered back in the 20th century, and there is an edition, you can find it. It's also downloadable on the internet. Tiruvāymoļi 1:1 to 1:5 are lost, so we only have the rest of the work. Maybe this lady was from Andhra, because the name Koneri, it's a name for another name for Swami Pushkarini in Tirumalai. And she also, among the acharyas that she thanks, the first one is Ramanujacharya, but she also mentions an acharya called Chandragiri Ayyan. We don't know who that is, but as you know, Chandragiri is a town that is close to Tirumalai. So she must have been from that region. Probably she migrated towards Kumbakoram at some point, because she calls herself a slave of Aparyamrita, which is Aravamudan. And then the last acharya that she lists is Vadakku Tiruvedi Pillai. So some people presume that she may have been a disciple of Vadakku Tiruvedi Pillai. And she quotes also words from the Ede, but it seems she also has at least one quotation from Swami Deshikan's Nyasa Vimshati, Nirbharo Nirbhayosmi. So she may have lived around that time, but she doesn't mention Manavala Mamunigar's works, so before that period and after. So this work deals only with about 160 verses, pasurams from the Tiruvāymoļi, not the whole 1,102. The author has a singular point of view. She thinks that the whole Tiruvāymoļi is actually there only to explain as an elaboration of the meanings of the first verse of the Tiruvāymoļi, meaning Uyarvara Uyarnalam. So what she does is, she takes up one verse of every decade, every patta, and then she points out how it explains the first verse of the Tiruvāymoļi. So she weaves, also what she does is weaves phrases from the first verse into the comments of the other verses that she comments. So it's very unique in a certain way. Now, there are many reasons why it is not known. I don't think I should get into that because it's already half an hour and it's really time that I moved on to other topics, because I still have a few things to say about the sub-commentaries now. Now, this sub-commentary, I think that one of the earliest is by Sakshat Swami, also known as Vedanta Ramanuja Mahadeshikan. He has written an Irvatinalayara Padi in order to explain and to add, I suppose, to Pillan's Arayara Padi. So it is very elaborate. You can imagine Pillan wrote 6,000 Padi and Sakshat Swami has written 24,000. So it's like 4,000 longer than the original work. And here he gives references from Ramanuja's Sri Bhashyam and Gita Bhashyam, but he also gives explanations based on Vedanta Deshikan's teachings. Now, Sakshat Swami's, just so that you have an idea, most famous disciple is Sri Tirupurandai Deshikan, who's also known as Gopalarya Mahadeshikan, who established the Munitraya Sampradayam. Now, let us move on to the Arumpada Valakams. There are two of them. So what are Arumpada Valakam? Let me just mention a couple of words and then move on to see which two these are. Now, the Arumpada Valakams are very, very important because they have a very crucial role. The ones that we know are there to explain the Eid to us, not the Tiruvāymoḻi, but the Eid. So that's why they are known as sub-commentaries. They are there to help us understand the commentaries, not the original work of one Arva or the other. Now, these Arumpada Valakams have a very crucial role. So they have three roles. The first is they explain the words that are difficult to understand in Nampillai's writings. Secondly, what they do is they give the Sangati, they give the links. Now, what does that mean? Well, as I said, Nampillai had this oral style. So when I'm talking, even if I forget a word, it doesn't matter. The body language helps, the context helps. But when we are reading, especially after all these centuries, we don't understand because important words are missing. Now, the Arumpada Valakam gives, suggestions as to what word is missing there. And also, sometimes there were questions for Nampillai, so he answered them. So the Eid records the answers, but the questions are not visible. So we don't understand what the questions are. The Arumpada Valakams give the questions and explain in what way Nampillai's words are an answer to those questions. And yeah, I think it does this. That's why it gives the Sangati, it gives the transition. It explains why apparently Nampillai goes from one point to another without there being a link. There is a link and they give this link. And then finally, also importantly, the Arumpada Valakams give explain to us the pramana vakyas. They explain what for example, they give Sanskrit quotations, what they mean, and they also give the akara, meaning where they come from. Sometimes they give the full quotation, etc. So this is very, very useful. Now, I think there are two commentaries here that are very important. It seems there are plenty more, but we'll only focus on these two. The first one is Adayavalaindan Arumpada Valakam by Attanjiyar. And it seems that he lived around the 18th century. I need to look into more detail into these Arumpada Valakams and the authors. He seems to have lived in Srirangam. That's why he calls it Adayavalaindan. As you know, it's the name of a street close to the temple. This Arumpada Valakam is full of Sanskrit. Sometimes whole sentences are in Sanskrit. In fact, he gives the main artham, the main explanation, the main meanings in Sanskrit. Now, the Jiyar Arumpada Valakam is by Gunakarampakam Ramanuja Jiyar, and it is based on the previous work, meaning on the Adayavalandan Arumpada Valakam. And he gives all the same explanations in Tamil, so very useful for us. So these Arumpada Valakams can sometimes be very expansive when they think that we need more explanations. For example, if you look at the Eid Mahapravesham, the first Eid Mahapravesham, for 2 lines by Nampillai, there are 13 pages of commentaries from explanations from the Arumpada Valakam. So there you go. I hope we have the time to look at them today. I'm not sure, but let's try. I need to keep an eye on the time as well so that I still have half an hour at least. So here's the verse. So before, let me just So I think this is a very famous verse, and I picked this one because the verse itself does not pose any problems. ஆடி ஆடி அகம் கரைந்து இசை பாடி பாடி கண்ணீர் மல்கி எங்கும் நாடி நாடி நரசிங்கா வென்று வாடி வாடும் இவ்வாணுதலே. So I have translated this more or less in the same order as the Tamil curse. So dancing and dancing, her heart dissolves, singing and singing, tears well up, seeking and seeking everywhere, saying, "Oh Narasimha," she pines away. This girl with a bright forehead pines away. So here, Namarva speaks in the voice of a mother whose daughter is pining for her beloved, whom she refers to as Narasimha. She has forgotten herself. She's agitated due to this love for her beloved who has disappeared, unfortunately. And from now on, I think you can follow on your PDF if you want, but I think it'll be more practical if you actually just look at my slides, because I have reshuffled the order of some of the texts. So let's now have a look at the Arairapadi commentary on this. Let me read this and then you can see. So the R, long R, is for Arairapadi. எம்பெருமானை பிரிந்த வியசனத்திலே தன்னை கொண்டு தரிக்க மாட்டாமையாலே தன்னுடைய ஆஸ்வாசார்த்தமாக அவருடைய குணச்சேஷ்டித்தங்களை பாடி ஆடின இடத்திலும் அது தனக்கு ஆஸ்வாசகரமாகாதே அவசாதகரமேயாக இனி அவனை கண்டால் அல்லது தரிக்க முடியாது என்று பார்த்து அவனை எங்கும் தேடி ஆஸ்ரிதருடைய துர்தசைகளில் சகசைவ தோன்றிக் கொண்டு நிற்கும் ஸ்வபாவனானவனே என்று அழைத்து பின்னையும் கண்டாலும் தேராததுருபடி அறவாடி போய் அறவாடினாள் இவ்வாணுதல் என்று திருத்தாயார் பிரலாபிக்கிறார். So திருத்தாயார் பிரலாபிக்கிறார். So the mother of the girl is lamenting, saying what? Saying, sometimes it's easy to go backwards. Let's see what happens. Let's begin at the beginning very quickly. I think it's fairly understandable, but just in case it's not, I'll take you through this. So எம்பெருமானை பிரிந்த வியசனத்திலே தன்னை கொண்டு தரிக்க மாட்டாமையாலே. So தரிக்க மாட்டாமையாலே, so being due to the fact that the girl is unable to bear, dharika can be even taken to mean to stay in life, to bear life, meaning to survive. Why is there a difficulty in bearing? Tanne kundu, meaning tanne, this kundu simply means al, tannal, dharika mattamayal, because she cannot bear anymore. Why does she find that difficult? Vyasanattile, due to the vyasana, and vyasana is distress. What vyasana does she have? Imperumane pirinda vyasanattile. So due the distress that is caused due to parting from the Lord, what happens? She is unable to bear. She can't take it anymore. So what happens? Tannudaya ashvasarthamaga. So for the sake of her own consolation, so she thinks, what shall I do to feel better? So for that sake, she does something. What does she do? Avanudaya gunacheshtitangalai paadi adina vidathilum. So what she does is, she sings paadi, she sings of what? Avanudaya gunas and cheshtitas, about his qualities and activities, deeds, etc. And then dances, paadi adina idathilum. Even when she tries to do that, there is a problem. Adu tanakku ashvasakaram ahade. Even singing and dancing, thinking of God, ashvasakaram ahade. It's not consoling to her. It's not just that it's not helping. Actually, it's making things worse. How? Avasadakarameyaha. So it becomes something that depresses her. So what does she do next? She says, "Ini avanai kandal alladhu dharikka mudiyadu endru paarthu." So she understands that dharikka mudiyadu. I cannot take it anymore. I cannot bear. I cannot be alive. Avanai kandal alladhu, unless I see him. Ini, now. So saying that, what did she do? Avanai engum tedi. She looks for him everywhere. And then what does she do? Ashritarudaya durdashaigalil sahasaiva tondrikondu nirkum swabhavananavane. So she is looking for him everywhere and calls out to him saying, Swabhavananavane, O you whose nature, O you whose character is to do what? Tondrikondu nirkum, is of appearing. It's to appearing all the time. When? Sahasaiva, immediately. When does he appear immediately? Durdashaigalil. in the bad situations. Whose bad situations? Ashritarudaya, of those who have sought refuge, meaning the surrenderers. So she calls out to him like that, looking for him. What does she do after that? Pinnayum kandalum teradadorupadi aravadipoi aravadnal. So she's become totally withering. So vadadal, like a flower, withering or suffering, being totally distressed. All these translations are fine. So ara means totally. So she becomes totally distressed. Why? Terada durupadi. How does she become distressed? Terada durupadi. She's not going to be consoled in such a way that she cannot be consoled. Kandalum, even if she sees pinnayum later on, because she has reached a state when she's so pining for him that unless he comes immediately, it's impossible that she will recover afterwards. Even if it comes later on, no use. Saying this, the mother is lamenting. Okay, so what can we see here? I think this really clearly summarizes the gist of the Pasuram, as you can see. And also Pillan, as you can see, does not give the Pratika. He doesn't say, okay, I'm going to comment on Adi Adi and this is what it means, etc. So we don't exactly know, unless we are very careful, which part refers to which part of the Pasuram. But that's perhaps where the sub-commentary helps. Here's what Sakshat Swami does. So this bit in red that I have marked, this is Sakshat Swami. He says, for example, Aham karendu engiradai vivarikkirar emperumane ityadiya. So between parentheses, he gives the pratika. So when Pillan writes emperumane, etc., etc., he does the vivarana of Aham karendu. So now we have a bit of an idea. And then he goes on. Isai padi 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 adi adi என்று அன்வயித்து விவரிக்கிறார் தன்னுடைய இத்தியாதியால். So when Pillan writes தன்னுடைய etc., here he explains padi padi and adi adi and also suggests the right order in which these words should be taken. I thought it'll be easier for you. I've taken here, this is the Arairapadi, which I just explained to you. And this is what Sakshat Swami does. So he says, as I explained, Emperumane Pirinda Vyasanatil, etc. From here up to the Rikamata Mayale, he says that Pillan is explaining Aham Karenda. From Ennudaya all the way up to Idatilum, he does the Vivaranam and the Anvayam of Padi Padi Adi Adi. Actually, Anvayam means it's the syntax, it's the natural order or the connection between the words. What Pillan is doing, and that we don't know when we are reading Pillan's commentary, and it's only thanks to the sub-commentary that we understand that what is happening here is Pillan is reshuffling the understanding. Pillan does not take it as Adi Adi, Aham Karendu, Padi Padi. He's like, no, no, no. Aham Karendu happens first. That's why Pillan explains this first. As you can see here, Vivaranam of Aham Karendu. And then because her heart is melting, what happens is she starts singing and then she starts dancing. Okay, this is what Anvaya means. And this is explained to us. What Pillan does is explained to us by Sakshat Swami. And then later on and so forth. He explains that from this bit is actually a vivaranam of Nadi Nadi, and then Ashrita Rudaya Durdashagalil Sahasaiva Tondri Kundu Nirkum Swabhavananavane is a vivaranam of Narasinga Avindra. And then this final part is a vivaranam of Vadi Vadu. So this is very, I think, very interesting and also very useful if we are reading Pillan's work. I think this is fairly understandable. So now I think we can move on and have a look at, oh yeah, he adds a bit of extra information, but I think it's not very, very important since we are running, I think, out of time. Let's move to the next, just look at the time, yeah. So let's move on to the Unbadi Nayarapadi, which is by Nanjiyar, sorry. You can see immediately, especially with the way that it has been typeset by the editor, that there is an introductory part, an avatarike, but also between square brackets, you see the pratika. So you know that Adi Adi means what follows is his explanation of Adi Adi. And then you have Ahankarenda, what follows is an explanation of Ahankarenda, and so on and so forth. So it becomes immediately clear how Nanjiyar goes on to explain these things. So let's read this. Okay. Mudar Patil, Narasimhamai Vandu, Sri Prahladarvanuடைய ஆபத்துக்கு உதவினவன் எனக்கு உதவுகிறலன் என்று பெண் பிள்ளை அவசன்னையாக நின்றாள் என்று சொல்லி திருத்தாயார் சோகிக்கிறார். So this gives you an idea of what's happening in the verse. So Tirutayar Shokikiral, the mother is becoming sad, solely saying, what is she saying? That Pen Pillai, her daughter, Avasannayaha Nindral Indra. So she is saying that her daughter is becoming Avasanna. We've already seen this word. It means she's becoming distressed. Saying this, she is becoming sad. And how is the daughter becoming sad? She says something, Narasimhamai, etc., up to Udavigiralan, and then saying that the girl is becoming sad. Now, what is she saying exactly? This is between quotations here. Narasimhamai vandu Sri Prahladarvanuடைய ஆபத்துக்கு உதவினவன். So this is the subject. He who helped Udavinavan when Prahladarvan was in a danger, ஆபத்து. How did he help? Narasimhamai vandu, coming as a Narasimha, எனக்கு உதவுகிறலன். He's not helping me. That's not fair, the girl says, and is upset. And because the girl is upset, the mother is upset. So this is the main meaning of the Pasuram, which Nanjir is now going to explain. Let me read, let me see how much time I have. Okay, I can just spend a little bit of time here. So Adi. So he's explaining Adi immediately. So he says, Vyasanati shayattale menmelena pannugira cheshtitangal manoharigalai irukirapadi. Now you may wonder, why would you say Adi? What does it mean, Adi? Of course, we know it means to dance. But why dancing? This girl seems to be so depressed. Why is she dancing? How can she move? He is explaining that. He says, Vyasanati shayattal menmelena pannugira cheshtitangal. So all the cheshtitas, all the actions that she is doing, menmelena, more and more. Why is she doing all these things? Vyasanati shayattale, due to an excess of distress. Manoharigalai irukirabadi. Actually, they are attractive. They really appeal to the mother's, the heart, because it's so cute, even though she's suffering so much. That's one explanation. The second explanation he gives for the Adi is Tudipin mihudiyai sollitragavumam. So it also means that Tudipin mihidi, it's the excess of tudipu, flurry, agitation, suffering, etc. And you need to remember that when you have agavumam in a commentary, it means that it is giving the second or third interpretations when many interpretations are possible. And usually the commentator's opinion is the last one that he gives. So here he gives two interpretations and he ends with Sullit Ragavumam. You can be sure that this is what Nanjia thinks to be the most appropriate explanation to Adi. Okay. Also, he continues, he says, Nrityanti iva mataram itivat. He says, he gives this quotation from somewhere. I will tell you, we will see that in the next commentaries. Mataram, as if the mother is dancing, itivat, etc., like that, etc. What does that mean? He doesn't say where the quotation comes from, what it means, how is it relevant in the context. Wait and see. You will know further if you wait. And then ahankarendu. Vyasanati shayattale mihavum shithilanta karanayai. So shithilanta karanai is like a bahuvrihi, she whose heart has become faint, etc., or weak. Migavum, very much. Why does it become like that? To the point of melting. Like ahankarendu vyasanati shayattale, due to an excess of vyasana. Okay, and then he goes on and on. He say paadi aadi aatramai sollugira sol paata irukirabadi. So why would you say that she is singing? Actually, he says aatramai sollugira sol. Her words that express the disconsolate nature of her suffering is like a song, because she's so beautiful, it looks like she's dancing. She has such a pretty way of expressing herself that even when she's lamenting, it comes across like a song. All these Nanjiyar does not say explicitly. You will see that the later acharyas do, if we have the time. What time is it? No, I think I need to move on. So I hope that you got an idea of how Nanjiyar writes his commentary. Now let's move to the next, to the Eid. Now, as you know, the Eid is very elaborate. So the commentary on this verse is very elaborate as well, but we really don't have that much time. So I have marked out some passages. We're going to read the passages that are in red because I think these are very interesting. And in blue, which are also very interesting, but I just won't have the time to read them. So I really suggest that you read them if you have the time. So let's begin. Not even here, we can even begin at the beginning. So Adi Adi. So this is Nampillai. Sthiti, Sthiti Gamana Shayanadigalil Uru Niyati Indrike. Niyati Indrike. So there's a full stop there. That's the first meaning he gives for Adi Adi. He says, Ura niyati indrike. There is no, niyati is a proper, in this context, it means the proper order, proper course of things. So there is no proper order of things here. In what? In the girl's sthiti, the way she is, she sits, for example. Gamana, the way she walks. And Shayana, she lies down, etc. So in everything she does, there is no proper course of things, no proper, it's deranged, it's disorderly. That's the first meaning he gives. The next one, Aratiyale பாடுகிற பாடுதான் திருத்தாயார்க்கு ஆகர்ஷமா இரான்ன்றது. So this padugira padu, we all know, it's the suffering that this girl is undergoing. Why is she undergoing this suffering? Aratiyal, and arati means anxiety due to this impression. She's suffering a lot, but to the mother, especially she's a mother, it's a mother's heart. All that the girl is doing, how do those things come across? Akarshakam. She finds them very attractive, that's Indradait. So Nampillai says this is the second way of looking at these things. And then he goes on. This is very interesting. Shri Kausalyayar Perumalai Pirindu Tudikira Tudipai Nrityantin Iva Mataram Endranire. Aha. Now we get a bit more of an idea as to where this quotation comes from. Kausalya, and then Perumal, etc. We know it comes from the Ramayana. So this is what it means. Indranire. Let's begin from Indranire and go backwards. Who said? Valmiki, obviously, because he wrote the Ramayana. What did Valmiki say? He said, Nrityantim eva mataram. The mother as if dancing. Now, who's this mother? What does he call dancing? Tudikira tudipai. He calls dancing the flurry, the agitation of Shri Kausalyayar, of Kausalya. On what occasion is she so agitated, almost as if she is possessed? Perumalai Pirindu, when she parted from Perumal, meaning Rama. So as Rama is leaving, we can see Kausalya being so upset that she seems to be dancing, but actually she's very agitated, but it still is very graceful. So this is what Nanjiyar tries to say when he quotes this bit of quotation, that even though it's a terrible situation that shows terrible suffering, it still is very nice to look at. Okay, now, is there more I should say here? Maybe we can read just another sentence. Vadivadagiyar vyaparangalellam inida irukumire. It means for those who are good looking, whatever they do, it looks very good. That's basically what he's trying to say. Okay, you can please continue, go on, read if you have the occasion. It's very, very nice, but here we really have to move on. On this page here, it was really interesting. I wanted to read it, but most probably we won't have the time because it gives Parashara Bhatta's Nirvaham and then also Pillan's Nirvaham. Usually Parashara Bhatta's Nirvaham is deemed to be the final Nirvaham, but in this case, it's one of the exceptions where Pillan's Nirvaham is thought to be more appropriate in this context. That's why it's given as the second Nirvaham. Sorry, we have to move on. Also, we have to move on from here. And then we come to this passage. Now, I have picked the commentary of the Eid, but also of Periyavachanpillai. I'm checking the time. On the word Narasingha, because I think the Eid is enchanting when it describes and explains Narasingha. So let's focus on Narasingha. How does Nampillai understand the occasion that the girl calls out Narasimha. The idea is that Prahlada called out to Narasimha and he was saved from suffering, but that is not happening with the girl. So Nampillai is imagining the mother to be complaining about this double standards. He helped Prahlada, he's not helping my daughter. So you will see she asks a series of rhetorical questions saying, what do you think? What do you think you're doing? Is that fair? You know, it's very, very nice. It's very oral. We can almost hear Nampillai speaking to us. Okay, let's read this passage. Is it where it ought to be? I think yes. Now I've got my own notes here, especially it's closer on, it's easier for me to read. Sorry. So let's read this. Narasingha Vendru, so he's going to comment on this. Prahladane pole oru tambam illadapadi irukkayale vaadum. So this girl, Vadum, she withers, she is distressed. Why? Prahladane pole oru tambam illadapadiyaale, because she does not have a tambam like Prahlada. Now, what is tambam? It could either mean stambam, like a pillar, or it could mean alambanam, meaning support. She does not have the kind of support that Prahlada had. That's why she's suffering. And now the mother says, again, matta sarvam aham sarvam ennum telivudayavanukku thotrinavan Kalangina avalaikku thotranu enumattale. So this is the basis for all the questions that the mother is going to ask Narasimha. So what is this basis? There is this quotation, Telivudayavan, that is Prahlada. So Prahlada had this clarity of mind. What is that clarity of mind he had? Matta sarvam aham sarvam. This is a quotation from the Vishnu Purana 85:2. It means everything is from me. I am everything. Now, Prahlada says this, not because he's like Hiranyakashipu who believes he's everything, but Prahlada has understood that he is Bhagavan's aprathak siddha visheshana, meaning he's an attribute of Bhagavan that cannot be separated from him. Bhagavan is inside him, so everything comes from him, meaning from him, the Bhagavan who's inside him. So everything is him, meaning the Bhagavan who's inside him. So the mother says, the basis is that Totrinavan. So he who appeared to the person, to the man, to the boy who had this clarity, Kalangina abalaika totrano, he's not appearing to an abala, like this weak, unprotected girl who is Kalangia, who is confused. She does not have the same kind of clarity of mind that Prahlada had. So he's not appearing to my daughter, the mother says. Ennumattale. So using this as a basis, what does she do? She asks question. Tamappan pahayanalo udavalavadu, neer pahayanal udavalahado. So, Tamappan pahayanalo udavalavadu. Will you only help if the father himself is an enemy? Neer pahayanal udavalahado. Won't you help if you yourself are the problem? Because obviously the girl is suffering due to separation from him. So obviously he is the source of the problem. And then next question. Jnana nishtarko udavalavad. Will you only help people who are grounded in jnana like Prahlada? Because he has all this enlightenment. Bhakti nishtarko udavalahado. Won't you help people who are grounded in bhakti like my daughter who's so devoted to you? And then she says, Angaluko udavalavad. Will you only help men? Almost like a feminist saying, Pengaluko udavalahado. Won't you help women? And then she goes on. Serada vadivu serthu udavilo udavalavadu. Will you only help if you have to put together a form that cannot be put together? Meaning, like it's so abnormal to put a lion's head to a human body. So will you only help if you have to do all those things? Will you not help if you don't have to do it? Which is the next question, which is irundapadiye udavalavarku udavalahado. Won't you help people whom you can help just as you are? And then the commentary goes on. ஒரு அதிகாரி நியத்தி, ஒரு கால நியத்தி, ஒரு அங்க நியத்தி என்கிற நிர்பந்தம் வேணுமோ இவளுக்கு, meaning this girl. Does this girl require this nirbandha? Meaning, do you need to insist upon adhikari niyati, kala niyati, and anga niyati for this girl? Now, what does this mean? Niyati is the restrictions. So, adhikari niyati, God, like Bhagavan had this niyati in the case of becoming Narasimha. This is the way he had to appear to help him. You know, adhikari is entitled to appear in a certain way. Kala Niyati, he had to appear at a certain time. Remember? We will see a bit more of that if we have the time. Probably we won't have the time. Anga Niyati, he had to appear with certain limbs, right? With the head of an animal and the body of a human being, etc. Ivalude rakshanattukkum yedenu mukham panna venumo. So do you need to mukham pannudal? There are many interpretations. Actually, the at least two, the Arumpadam Vilakams actually give both explanations. So do you need to put on a face, some sort of face, edenum muham, ivalude rakshanattukkum, even for her, even for protecting her, he asks. So as you can see, this is very, very oral. So the style is very oral. It's very direct. You can almost imagine this mother asking these questions to God, who actually has disappeared, is not even there. I hope this was, you liked it as much as I do. And I'm afraid that time is running. So I have 6 minutes. Let's see what more we can see. So this is Adayavalandan Arumpadavurai, which explains this Adhikari Niyati Ityadi. As you can see here, Ityadi. We unfortunately won't be able to read everything, but what I would like to point out here is this. Adavad, he explains, Prahlada Rakshane, Naratva, Simhatva, Rupajati, Dvayavishishta eva, Adhikari iti niyama ityarthaha. So as you can see, he has a whole sentence in Sanskrit. Of course, he has Tamil, but this is more than Maniprabha, right? This is a mixture totally of Sanskrit and Tamil. You have whole sentences in Sanskrit. Please read if you have the time. Let's move to the Jir Arumpadavurai, where he has the same thing, where he uses Sanskrit, but it's mostly in Tamil. So he says, Prahladan, Sandhya Kalam, Narasimhatvangal engira nirbandham venumo endrapadi. And then he goes on and explains in Tamil, not in simple Tamil, I would say, but a few Sanskrit words as well. So these are the Arumpadavurais, etc. with the Eder. So a very quick look now at Piriyavachan Pillai's Iruvatinalayarapadi. It's actually, he follows very much his Acharyan. So the introduction, as you can see, is very, very similar. Mudar Patil Shri Prahladarvanuடைய ஆபத்துக்கு உதவினவன் எனக்கு உதவுகிறிலன் என்று இவள் அவசன்னை ஆகா நின்றாள் என்கிறாள். As you can see, almost the same words, same meaning. And then also the beginning of Adi Adi, Sthiti, Gamana, Shayanadigal, Mari Mari Varigira, Vyasanati Shayatai, Ire, Adi Traga, Sulligiradu, etc. So you can see it's very much similar to that. Badivarahale, etc. And then he also explains, no, actually doesn't explain. Look, you have Nrityanti Viva Mataram Enna Kadavadire. He doesn't go on and explain the way Nampillai has. So on this occasion, he doesn't elaborate too much, but still, you can see roughly how closely he follows Nampillai. Now let's focus on the passage of Narasingha and see what Piriyavachan Pillai does. Varavukku sambhavanai illada idathile thotravanahayale. That's why she calls out Narasingha, says Piriyavachan Pillai. She calls Narasingha because Narasingha is somebody who appears where it's impossible that somebody could appear. Like, you know, he appeared breaking a pillar. So, and then he goes on and explains a bit more. பத்துடை அடியவர்க்கு பின்பு அவதாரங்களுக்கு அவ்வரகு போக மாட்டார். Now, what does that mean? Without context, it's very hard to understand. What he means is that, why does she not call Gajendra Varada? Because he too appeared immediately in times of danger. That's because after Pattude Adiyavar, that's I think Tiruvāymoļi 1:3, Nammarva does not go beyond the avatars. He mainly focuses on the avatars. That's why she calls it Narasimha. And Narasimha is the one who appeared where he was not expected to appear. It was a surprise. So that's why. And then Anumai, Mattas Sarvam Aham Sarvam Ennum Telivum Venumo Udavum Bodu. So he only keeps two elements of the question. He just asks that in one question. He quotes the same, Mattas Sarvam Aham Sarvam, etc. So you can see it's very, very close both to Nanjir and to Nampillai, I think. Right, what else can I say about this? I think I have said most things. Yeah, let's move to the Pannirayarapadi, which is the most helpful for us. I have 2 minutes. Oh my God. As you can see, there's an avatarike, but also Ivanudal. This is word by word. Ivanudal, this girl with a bright forehead. Olividugindra netriyai udayalana ival. So this explains Ivanudal. This girl who has a forehead that gives out luster. And then Adi Adi. It glosses Adi Adi by Vallaradinar pole Darshaniyamambadi Tannatramayale Nindravidatil Nillade Palakalum Ulavi. So he explains Adi Adi by she moves about many times Nillade, not standing Nindravidatile in one place. Why? Tannatramayale, because she's so disconsolate. Darshaniyamambadi, and yet it is very good to look at. How good is it to look at? Ballar Adina Pole, as if somebody who's really accomplished in dancing dances. So what is between parentheses? This was the editor's choice. The editor thinks that what is between parentheses is the extra explanations that he gives, whereas what is outside the parentheses is the direct explanation of Adi Adi, and so on and so forth. I have just 1 minute. So, Tiruvāymoḻi Vasagamale, oh my God, I haven't had the time to read that with you. Let me just go through this very quickly. At least read this so that you can hear. This is unfair to leave out the woman. So, Adi Adiyil, Tadiya Samsleshatte Asaipatte, Piramayale, Vanda Iravale, Petra Samsleshamum Irande, Adiye Pidittu Kupittar. Again, she summarizes, there's an avatar, okay? And here she says that in some of the previous Tiruvāymoļi pattis, there was a samslesha with God, but there was also a samslesha with the Tadiyas. But in this one, she has lost both. That's why she is suffering. And then she explains, கீழில் திருவாய்மொழியில் பருகி கழித்தேன் என்று கிருஷ்டராய் அது தன்னை பாகவதர்களோட உசாவித்தரிக்க வேண்டும் என்று பார்த்து, and so on and so forth. I think this is, I'm afraid that I don't have the time. This is, I need to take more time and I don't have that amount of time. My time is just up. So what I'll do is say sorry to Tirukoniri Dasya in hope that I will read her at some other point. And also thank you for your patient listening. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, madam. Very, very nice talk. We are really enjoying your talk. Now I request Dayanadi to say a few words. Dayanadi, please.
Good morning, one and all. This is immense pleasure to invite me in this learned audience arranged by the Alumni Association of the Department of Vaishnavism. I first of all thank Professor Secretary of the Alumni Association, Dr. T.K. Parsardi, and his members. Shriyakanto Nando Varaguna Ganaikaspada Vapuhu Nata Shesha Vadyah Paramakapado Vang Manasayoho Abhutir Bhumiryo Nata Janadrisha Madi Purushaha Manastat Padabje Paricharana Saktam Bhavatume Adi Adi Iti Shatake Sugandhatvam Suganyaya Krishna Nandam Anubhuyate Vidishui Suganyaya Ananda Rasaya Ananda Krishnaya Manasi Nandayate. This is the shloka. Adi Adi அப்படின்ற பாசுரத்தினாலே அதில் இருக்கக்கூடிய சுகந்த பரிமளமான அர்த்தங்களை நமக்கு தெரிவித்து சுகன்யா சம்ஸ்கிருதத்திலே நல்ல சுகந்தம் என்று சொல்லலாம், குணவதின்னு வச்சுக்கலாம். Krishna, Krishnanandaya, their name is self Krishna and Ananda. That this both word implies in the Paramatma also. So Krishnanandaya Anubhuyate. We are enjoying the Krishna Anandam in Adi Adi in this pasuram. Vidushi Suganyaya Ananda Rasaya. Ananda Rasam We are enjoying the nectar of the Tiruvāymoḻi in the canto of Adi Adi Aham Karayende, the beauty, one of the hot pasuram in Tiruvāymoļi. Ananda Krishnaya. It is two meaning, I think so. One is Ananda, Anando Brahme Divya Janat. It Upanishad சொல்லக்கூடியதான வார்த்தை. அது வந்து கிருஷ்ண தத்துவம், கிருஷ்ண கிருஷ்ணா தத்துவம் என்று சொல்வார்கள். ஆனந்த கிருஷ்ணாய ஆனந்த கிருஷ்ண கிருஷ்ணயா மனசி நந்தயதே. நம் மனசிலே அந்த சொற்பொழிவு, the lecture of this has been dancing in all our heart. So in this lecture, Swami Vedanta Desika comprehensively explaining in Dravidopanishad Tatparya Ratnavali in one sloka, Prahladarthe Nrisimham Kshapita Vidusha Lavallabham Kshiptalankam Shlela Pratyarthaketum Samahara Tulasi Malinam Dhairyahetum Trane Dattapadanam Swaripurhirti Krita Shvasanam Deeptahetihi Satpreksharakshitaram Vyasana Nirasanam Vyaktakirtim Jagada. இந்த ஒரு ஸ்லோகத்தினாலே தாத்பரிய ரத்னாவளி Swami explaining about all 10 pasurams of Adi Adi Aham Karayende யோஜனா. இந்த 10 பாசுரத்தில் இருக்கக்கூடியதான யோஜனையை சுவாமி ரொம்ப அழகாக எடுத்து காமிச்சிருக்கார். In this extempo lecture in Mahabhashya, the Patanjali quotes the word, how the Shabda conveys Ingita Nimishita Cheshtitaihi. The great scholar also watching Tirunarayanan, Professor Tirunarayanan also watching. If there is any mistake in the Sanskrit, please rectify, sir. So, Ingita Nimishita Cheshtitaihi. When the Madam Vidushi explaining, we doesn't want to have the noise of your word. Your explanation and the Nimishitam Cheshtitam itself convey the message. உங்களுடைய வாய்ஸ் வரணும்னு அவசியமே இல்லை போல இருக்கு. நீங்க சொல்லக்கூடியதான அந்த அனுபவமே accent itself convey what is the meaning of the commentary. So அந்த சொல்லும்போது திருவாய்மொழியில ரெண்டு சம்பிரதாயிக வியூ என்று சொல்வார்கள். அது மட்டுமல்லாமல் அனலிசிங் மெத்தட், இதுல வந்து அனலைசிங் மெத்தடை பார்க்கறதுன்ற ரொம்ப கஷ்டம். வெரி டிஃபிகல்ட் டு சி த அனலைசிஸ் ஆஃப் த திருவாய்மொழி கமெண்ட்ரிஸ். ஏன்னா ஆச்சாரியர்கள் சொல்லிட்டு வரார்கள், அதுல நம்ம வந்து எதுவும் சொல்லக்கூடாது அப்படின்னு ஒரு பட்சம் இருக்கும். இருந்தாலும் அதுல வந்து எப்படி அனலைஸ் பண்ணணும் அப்படின்றத நம்ம வந்து we should do, the researcher have, the academician have the right to do it. அதுல ரொம்ப அழகாக ஏதோ இந்த பாசுரத்துல இந்த ஆடி ஆடி beautiful commentary by all commentators beginning from ஆறாயிரப்படி and Uttamur Swami. We are missing the researcher, what way they are missing I do not know. Only the last available commentary in the century of Tiruvāymoļi is Uttamur Swami, is only his commentary. And the commentary பார்த்தாதான் நமக்கு பூர்வர்களோட கமெண்ட்ரியில இருக்கக்கூடிய யோஜனைகளை எப்படி அவர்கள் ஹேண்டிலிங் த கமெண்ட்ரிஸ் அண்ட் விச் வே த யோஜனா ஹஸ் பீன் டன் அப்படின்றது உத்தமூர் சுவாமியோடைய கமெண்ட்ரியை பார்த்தாதான் தெரியும். அதுல என்ன ரெண்டு விஷயம் நம்மளுக்கு தெரியும் அப்படின்னா, we can have உத்தமூர் சுவாமிஸ் கமெண்ட்ரியில பார்த்தோம்னா இலக்கண குறிப்பு, பாசுரத்துல இருக்கக்கூடியதான தொகைகள் ஏன் இந்த இடத்துல அந்த தொகையை they are using the grammar அப்படின்றத வந்து யாருமே சொன்னது கிடையாது. ஒன்லி உத்தமூர் சுவாமியோடைய கமெண்ட்ரிஸ் தான் we can see that way. வேற எங்கேயுமே பார்க்க முடியாது. பியூட்டிஃபுல் வே. அதை நான் வந்து ஆஸ் ஏ அகடமிஷியன் நான் என்ன சொல்றேன் அப்படின்னா, இதை யாருமே கையே வைக்கல. ரிசர்ச்சர் வந்து யாருமே வந்து அந்த உத்தமூர் சுவாமியோட கமெண்ட்ரியை வந்து படிக்கிறதே இல்லை. தேர் ஒன்லி மேலே போயிட்டு இப்படி போறாளே தவிர, பட் அவ யாரும் வந்து அந்த கமெண்ட்ரி உள்ள போய் இன்வால்வ் ஆகி பார்க்கல. அதுல பார்த்தோமானால்தான் we can see எப்படி வந்து பூர்வாச்சாரியர்களுடைய கமெண்ட்ரியோடைய வே how he explained அப்படின்ற அந்த யோஜனையை ஒரு திருவாய்மொழியோட வியாக்கியானங்களையும் பாசுரங்களையும் எக்ஸ்பிளைன் வேற யாருமே அந்த மாதிரி பண்ணல. அதே மாதிரி இந்த திருவாய்மொழியோடைய முதல் உபோத்காத்தத்திலேருந்து ஆரம்பிச்சு ஒரு பட்சம் ஆல் த கமெண்ட்ரிஸோடைய பட்சத்தை எடுத்து what are all the thing has been said by Purva commentaries has been classified and has been summarized and has been set in proper way எடுத்து காமிச்சிருக்கார் உத்தமுஷம். இதை நான் சொல்றது ஏன் அப்படின்னா, இந்த கமெண்ட்ரியும் we should involve for the international level. இது ஒன்று இருக்குன்றது இந்த ஃபோரம் தான் we can take the commentaries to the level. A beautiful commentary. இன்னைக்கு we can see how far madam involved in the திருவாய்மொழி commentary. சூப்பர்பா, அது வந்து மதுர துவனையா ரொம்ப அழகாக அதை வந்து எடுத்து சொல்லி அதுல இருக்க யோஜனையை சொல்றதுதான் ரொம்ப கஷ்டம். யோஜனம் என்ன அப்படின்னா, படிச்சுடலாம் கமெண்ட்ரிய, we can read the commentary, but what is the main thing has been said in the commentary. இப்ப நரசிங்கா அப்படின்னு கூப்பிட்டார். மேடம் has pointed out that ஆழ்வார் can call கஜேந்திரா and he can call கிருஷ்ணா, யார வேணா சொல்லலாம். பட் நரசிங்கா எதுக்கு சொல்றதுக்கு அப்படின்றத வந்து ஒரு மீனிங்ஃபுல் வர்த்தியா கொண்டு போனது யாரு? அந்த ராசிக்கியம் என்று சொல்வார்கள். அதை கொண்டு போனது கமெண்ட்ரி உரைக்காரர். The commentator only that take the word Narsinga to the beautiful way. ஏன் அப்படின்னா, அவர்களுக்குத்தான் அதோடைய அர்த்தம் புரிஞ்சு. நம்ம ஆழ்வார் சொன்ன மாதிரி என் நெஞ்சினால் நோக்கி காணி, இந்த பாசுரம் என் நெஞ்சினால் நோக்கி காணி. When the commentator explaining, they became a நம்மாழ்வார். அவர் நம்மாழ்வார் ஆன பிறகு அப்புறம் தான் நம்மளால அந்த கமெண்ட்ரியை படிக்க முடியும். So if we want to know the inner meaning of the திருவாய்மொழி, ஃபர்ஸ்ட் நம்ம அசியூம் பண்ணிக்கணும் நம்மாழ்வார கொஞ்சம் நம்ம நாயிகா பாவத்துல மாறணும். அதை வந்து ரொம்ப பியூட்டிஃபுல்லா எக்ஸ்பிளைன் பண்ணி, தென் வெரி டிஃபிகல்ட் டு அண்டர்ஸ்டாண்ட் த ஆறாயிரப்படி. ஆறாயிரப்படியை வந்து படிக்கிறதுன்றதே ரொம்ப கஷ்டம். ஏன்னா அது வந்து ஒரு பெரிய there is no, in Sanskrit we called as a விராம தண்டம் ரஹிதம். அங்க எதையுமே ஃபாலோ பண்ணோம் ஒரு இதுவோ இருக்கவே இருக்காது, பெருசா போயிட்டே இருக்கும். அதுல எது வந்து பதம் எங்க நிக்கிறது, வாட் இஸ் த மீனிங் ஆஃப் த பாசுரம். ஏன்னா அதுல வந்து கொட்டேஷனே கிடையாது. இப்போ ரைட்லி மென்ஷன்ட் ஆடின்றத வந்து இப்ப இருக்கக்கூடிய புக்ல வேணா தே மென்ஷன்டே தவிர பிராச்சீன தாளகோஷத்துல வந்து கிடையாது. நேர ஆரம்பமே அவர் என்ன வியாக்கியானமோ அதை ஆரம்பிப்பார். ஸோ வெரி டிஃபிகல்ட் டு அண்டர்ஸ்டாண்ட். அது இல்லாத அதுல என்னன்னா சம்ஸ்கிருத பாகுல்யாத்து அப்படின்னு எடுக்கிறாரு. அதுல நிறைய வந்து சம்ஸ்கிருத பதங்களுடைய நாலேஜ் நம்மளுக்கு தேவையானது, அதோடைய அபேட்சம் நிறைய இருக்காது. அதை புரிஞ்சுக்கிறதும் கொஞ்சம் கஷ்டம். அதுக்கப்புறம் தான் இன் கமெண்டோரியல் லிட்ரேச்சர்ல பார்க்கும் பொழுது ஒன்னொன்னா தே ரெடியூசிங் த லாங்குவேஜ். ரெடியூசிங் லாங்குவேஜ் என்ன, இந்த ரொம்ப சான்ஸ்கிரிட்டிஸ்டா இல்லாத தமிழும் ரொம்ப கலக்காத, அதுக்கப்புறம் ஒரு மாதிரியா கொண்டு போய் எல்லா லேர்னர்ஸ் ஈஸி லேர்னிங்கா கொண்டு போனது தான் நம்மளுடைய வைஷ்ணவ சம்பிரதாயத்துடைய கமெண்டோரியல் லிட்ரேச்சர். இன்னைக்கும் ஆழ்வார்கள் பாசுரங்கள்ல வந்து கமெண்டோரியல் எல்லாரும் படிக்க முடியுன்றது வந்து ஆச்சாரியர்கள் நமக்கு கொடுத்த ஒரு கிஃப்ட். இது வந்து வேற திருமுறைகள்லாம் இன்னைக்கும் மொழிபெயர்ப்பதுல வந்து ரொம்ப கஷ்டப்படுறாரு. ஃபார் ஆல் த பன்னிரு திருமுறை ரொம்ப டிஃபிகல்ட்டி, பிகாஸ் தெர் இஸ் நோ கமெண்ட்ரி, ப்ராப்பர் கமெண்ட்ரி ஃபார் த திருமுறை. ஸோ இந்த பாசுரம் ஒரு பாசுரத்திலேயே we can see in this one decade itself so many inner meaning. மேடம் வந்து explaining that only ஆடி. அதுக்கப்புறம் போயிருக்கிற பாசுரங்கள்லாம் it take 1 month to explain the ஆடி பாசுரம் itself. ஸோ அந்த இதை வந்து ரொம்ப அழகாக எடுத்து சொல்லி, ஸோ இந்த மாதிரி தான் வே ஆஃப் அனலைசிங் ஆஃப் த சப்ஜெக்ட் வந்து ரொம்ப தேவை. இப்போ இருக்கக்கூடிய ஒரு அகாடமிக் ஃபீல்ட்ல நம்ம வந்து கமெண்டோரியல் சப்கமெண்ட்ரிஸ் எல்லாம் எடுத்து அனலைசிங் பார்க்கணும். மணிப்பிரவால அனலைசிங் எப்படி இருக்கு, அதோடைய வேர்ட் சப்தாலங்காரம் எப்படி இருக்கு, ஏன் இதை சொல்றார்கள், இதுதான் வெரி இம்பார்ட்டன்ட் டு ஸ்டூடெண்ட் அண்ட் ரிசர்ச்சர் ஆல்சோ. வெறும் திருவாய்மொழின்றது வந்து பக்தி இலக்கியம், அது வேற. பட் இன் கமெண்ட்ரிஸ் extempore the commentators explained வெரி இம்பார்ட்டன்ட் திங்ஸ். நம்மளுக்கு தெரியாத பல விஷயங்களை பத்தி வெறும் சாம்பிரதாயிக விஷயம் உண்டி இல்லை, லௌகீக விஷயங்கள்லாம் கூட எக்ஸ்பிளைன்ட் இந்த திருவாய்மொழி கமெண்ட்ரிஸ். கொலுலாம் பத்தி கூட சொல்லியிருக்காரு, அது என்ன என்பதெல்லாம். அவ்வளோ ஒரு இதை வந்து she taken as a research work for a long time. நாம் நிறைய கேட்டிருக்கோம். in our department also she given about Maniprava literature and so many things. So இந்த மாதிரி ஒரு commentaries, those want to take research, இந்த மாதிரி விஷயங்கள் hidden unknown thing of ஈடு, unknown thing of 9000 படி, அந்த மாதிரி பல கமெண்ட்ரிஸ் இருக்கு. அதில் பார்த்து நம்ம வந்து அதில் இருக்கக்கூடிய விஷயத்தை எடுத்து நாம் அதை வந்து ரொம்ப அழகாக பண்ணணும். ஸோ ஐ தேங்க்ஃபுல் ஃபார் her given a wonderful lecture on Tiruvāymoļi. So next time, if time permits, you can take Uttamur Swami also, if time permits, and you can take only Uttamur Swami as a early 20th century commentaries and explain. It is my humble request. So I thankful for Alumni Association and all participants who are, and सर्वेभ्यः अत्र आगत्य समामिमां शृणुध्वं, तदनन्तरं शृणुध्वमपि विद्वांसः अपि आगताः, तेषामपि पृथक्तया आशुकवि श्रीरङ्गतः तिरुनारायण महाभागाः पादारविन्दे वारं वारं प्रणम्य अत्र सभामिमां सर्वेषाम् आश्रयातः आगतः विदुषीमपि अहं सन्तुष्टः। सर्वेषां समानवकः। तदनन्तरम् अत्र भाषणं मधुरवाण्या कृतवन्तः विदुषी सुकन्या अपि धन्यवादं प्रकटीकरोम्य अद्य सभामिमाम् अहं विरमामि। धन्यवादः।
Thank you, Mr. Dayanidhi. On behalf of Suganya, I will assure you one thing. Next lecture will be purely on Uttamur Swamis. Same Adi will be on only on Uttamur Swami. And I also
Adi Swami. First our avatarikia we can take.
Whatever it is, possible. She will confine herself to only do. She will do it. She is capable of doing it, I know. And I also forgot to thank Mr. Trinarayanan, our ex-pro HOD of Sanskrit Department, St. Joseph College. Thank you very much, sir. And Swamiji from Vishnumohan Foundation has also come. I am thankful to one and all, really. Now I request Mr. Kalian Sampath to formally give the vote of thanks.
அருமை. மேடத்தினுடைய ஸ்பீச் ரொம்ப எக்ஸலண்டா இருந்தது. கேக்குறதா?
கேக்குறேன் சார்.
அவங்களுடைய 6000 படி, 9000 படி, 24000 படி எல்லாத்தையுமே ரொம்ப விளக்கமா சொன்னாங்க.
படிப்படியாவே.
முக்கியமா அந்தாதிங்கிறதுல ஒரு இடத்துல வரக்கூடிய ஒரு நெருடலை ரொம்ப அருமையா சொன்னாங்க. பூன்னு முடியும் ஒரு பாசுரத்துல, அடுத்தது தேனமர்னு ஆரம்பிக்கும். இது அந்தாதிப்படி இல்லையேன்னு பல தமிழ் இலக்கணப்படி தவறுன்னு சொல்லுவாங்க. ஆனா அதுக்கு விளக்கம் சொன்னது ரொம்ப அருமையா இருந்தது. அந்தாதி இதெல்லாம் ஏற்றுக்கொள்ளக்கூடியது, பொருள் பார்த்து செய்யணும் அப்படின்னு ரொம்ப நல்லா இருந்தது. பிள்ளானுடைய வியாகனத்தையும் ரொம்ப அருமையா சொன்னாங்க. இதயம் கரைகிறதுன்னு சொன்னது நம்ம இந்த பேச்சுக்குமே இதயம் கரைகிறதுன்னு சொன்னா தப்பு கிடையாது. அந்த அளவுக்கு அருமையா டாக்டர் சுகன்யா ஆனந்த கிருஷ்ணன் அவருடைய பேச்சு நல்லா இருந்தது. இதுல பல பேர் பங்கு கொண்ட அத்தனை பேருக்கும் வைஷ்ணவனுடைய முன்னாள் மாணவர் சங்கம் அலுமினி அசோசியேஷன் நன்றியை தெரிவித்துக் கொள்கிறேன். நன்றி, வணக்கம்.
Next lecture will be on Srirangam Temple by Dr. Chitra Madhavan, very big historian of